even if you just pause and take a breath,
Yeah.
sometimes it can then allow you to take a different direction than maybe where you were going.
Hey, everybody. Ken Hendricks from Home Instead here. Thanks so much for joining me again today. My guest that I'm joined by today is a good friend of mine who's been on the show a couple times before, Melinda Joy Pattison. She's a licensed psychotherapist practicing here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of caregiver fatigue. During these times with COVID and needing to social distance and isolate in our homes, it can be especially hard for those that have the role of a caregiver. So we're going to be talking about that, some methods of self-care that are available to us during this era. And so I'm very happy to have her on. Thank you for joining me, MJ.
It's always a pleasure, Ken.
So I
Happy
know
to be
you,
here.
yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you. I know that you've been on with me a few times before, but for those who it may be their first time watching a conversation with us, can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, and maybe one or two things that you're doing for yourself to stay mentally and physically healthy during this time?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I am in psychotherapy practice, private psychotherapy practice. I got my master's degree in counseling from Southwestern College right here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And um, so to do the work of therapy, it is imperative to do the self-care, and is in fact is in our code of ethics that we do that.
Mm.
And personally, I believe that a very basic part of self-care is therapy. And so myself, to do the work of supporting others, I do my own therapy. So that's a primary thing that I've continued to do throughout this pandemic, is to see my therapist on a regular basis.
That's
That's
fantastic.
one thing. hmm hmm And um, I'll just bring up the topic of uh, love languages in regards to self care.
Mm.
You're familiar with that
A little
term, the
bit,
love
yeah,
languages?
a little bit, yeah.
So
Just
there's
tell.
a there's a book by Gary Chapman. There's 5 love languages, where there's touch, words of encouragement, gifts, acts of service, and time are the 5 that he identifies.
Mhm.
And I think they're very useful to look at those in relation to our self care. For example, my love language is a lot about touch.
Mm.
And to that end, I get a significant amount of body work. And now you may say, how are you doing that during this time? But there are a couple things that I've been able to continue with, which is acupuncture,
That's great.
and the other is a modality called structural integration, and it's this practitioner has been able to continue to work because he's helping people a lot with pain
Mm.
management, pain, and so I've continued to do those things.
That's
There's more,
fantastic.
but we
Yeah,
could use up all our time talking about that.
well, I really like that you mentioned that perspective on the love languages, because from my understanding, that book, although valuable in and of its own approach, is more so about relationships and relating to
Right.
another, like our significant other,
hmm
in the way that they'll feel most loved, right? But
Right. Right.
relating to our, identifying what our own, manner in which we feel most loved, and then relating that back to ourselves. I think that, I'm not sure the book even talked about that, but that's a great
I don't think so.
perspective.
I need to have a conversation with Gary Chapman,
He
but
needs to write another book and maybe have you be co-author.
for another day.
So caregiver fatigue is something that's a concern that's on the radar in both of our adjacent fields. Um, how do you tend to identify it in folks that you're working with? How does it show up?
Oh, wow. So it can show up in increased reactivity.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really common. Um, Increased fatigue, just physically tired, but also mentally weary.
Hmm.
And I was actually having a conversation with someone earlier today about um, Ken, I completely lost my train of thought. Would you help me out here?
No,
I
that's
mean, it
okay.
just left me. It
That's
just totally left me where I was
no,
going with that.
so
Oh
we're talking about ways in which you see caregiver fatigue popping
my
up.
God.
You
You
said it.
just saw it.
What's that?
You just saw it. You just saw it happening right in front of your eyes.
It's happened to me before
I
too.
just,
But you said increased reactivity and general fatigue, probably emotionally and physically. And then you said you were having a conversation with someone today about something along those lines. But I'm sure a lot of the conversations that you have with the folks that you work with, tend to center around fatigue in lots of different areas of life. But given the era that we're in, with quarantining and isolation, what types of things are you seeing that are contributing to caregiver fatigue that are unique to this time period?
wow. I'm really not sure that any of them are unique in and of themselves to this time period, but the level of it is increased exponentially during this time period. And it's not just about the COVID era, but it's also about civil unrest and political uncertainty. In addition to, if somebody is caregiving,
Yeah.
that's like way up high on the stress meter.
Hmm.
And then if they have anything at all going on in their lives besides that, I mean,
Which that would be unheard of, right? Who has more going
right,
on in
right.
their
I
lives?
mean, right. Who has anything else to do? um, then the stress it just ratchets up. It ratchets up, and it's cumulative. It compounds. Mental stress can then manifest in physical um, illness.
Hmm.
Could be, there can be emotional breakdown, mental breakdown, even spiritual breakdown. That's coming from where I operate out of a very holistic uh, philosophy around therapy and around our beings generally. And I often have conversation with my clients about feelings,
Hmm.
unprocessed feelings, which stress, you can put stress in there in that category. If it's unprocessed, not not alleviated, it will compound and compound and compound, and it will manifest in uh, another issue.
Or not generally just expressed, right? I think that, with
Hmm.
your clients, I mean, one of the things, just to offer kudos to your clients and anyone who seeks out a therapist, is that they're doing just that. They're seeking
They
out
are
they're
right.
seeking out an unbiased listener at minimum. And
Yes.
that
Yes.
in and of
Hmm.
itself can be extremely valuable. I mean, because people,
Hmm.
I know that people will, feel like maybe if they have some really good close friends that they can confide in, that can be a support system for sure. But
Hmm.
having someone that you can talk to on a regular basis, that's there to get into the real nitty gritty. And you have the open door to just let it all hang out. It's
Yes.
so beneficial because you can't really do that with even your closest of friends. Because if you do that over and over and over again with your close friends, they're not going to want to hang out with you after a while.
And they're not objective, and they're not required to be.
Mm,
Family, friends, partners, they're not that's not their job to be objective necessarily. They're emotionally invested in the relationship. A therapist not is trained to not be emotionally invested in the relationship, but to be a support, a non-judging support.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of
And
the
I
things
don't know
that
that it's what I whoops.
no, I'm sorry. Uh, that was a Zoom faux pas. Everybody's familiar with them happening, I'm sure. So, uh, one of the things I was thinking about, with regard, you said that you don't think that there are any, unique, specific, unique ways in which this current era is producing more and more fatigue in folks, but it's the level of things that we tend to face, regardless of
Hmm.
whether we're living during a period like COVID or not. It made me think of the fact that, caregivers, one of the symptoms I think associated with fatigue and caregiving is oftentimes a feeling of being trapped. And
Mm.
I think that the feeling of being trapped is something that a lot more people can relate to these days, right? Not just in like the plain old practical sense of needing to stay home, but that does exasperate, I'm sure, the
Oh
feeling
yeah.
the
Hmm.
feeling that one might have of being unable to find any sort of respite or reprieve from
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
overbearing situation, a situation that started to feel overbearing. Um,
Yes.
what tips would you offer for people, just in a general sense, who are feeling fatigue of this sort? I know, for caregivers seeking respite and help, like Home Instead, for instance, we're still providing a high level of services during this time. It's an essential service, providing caregiving support in the home. But routines maybe and practices that people might be able to implement or get back to if they're feeling themselves starting to experience fatigue.
Oh, sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep is like the all important uh, another very basic element of self care. Getting appropriate sleep. And I don't know how the time change affects different people differently, but it takes me a little bit to reorient to that.
Yeah.
But sleep is key. And
One of the things that
also,
on that note, and I want to get back to where you're going to, because I want to hear the other things that you're thinking of. But with sleep, you remind me of the fact that sometimes when I'm feeling particularly trapped or confined by a situation in my life, sometimes those late night hours feel like freedom. Like after everybody's in bed
ah,
and I can
mm-hmm.
stay up and watch some shows or something like that. But oftentimes I pay for that the next day. So I think that sometimes we interpret,
Mm-hmm.
we look for release maybe in the wrong places, or we think we're doing
Mm-hmm.
self-care but maybe we're not. Like if we're doing self-care by depriving ourselves of sleep, it's probably not the best.
Well, and it's not because what you're saying is also very true about, finding that moment when everybody else has gone to bed to have a little bit of, time with self. And so the thing we have to do is look for a balance in there somewhere. But we could do a whole episode on sleep hygiene,
Hmm.
just for example. We could do a whole conversation about that. But The other thing that I often mention, I find myself talking to my clients, and this is whether they're caregivers or not, but it applies across the board. I find myself talking to them about sleep, about vitamins, their nutrition, and about taking a pause
Mm.
when they feel in their body, that paying attention, and they feel in their body stress, taking a pause and just even asking themselves, what is it that I need right now? Even if you just pause and take a breath, just pause to take a breath.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can then allow you to take a different direction than maybe where you were going. And any is good. Any is
I
good.
like
And
that.
little,
It is
and
good.
yeah, and beginning a practice of that expands on itself to being to a place where you become more mindful of just generally being aware of what you need at any given time. It grows. And of course, a therapist's job is to support to support uh, clients in the doing of those things for self-care.
Well,
It's a big
speaking
part of it.
of, and I know we mentioned it before, but a lot can be said for having someone to talk to, especially a professional who's well versed in these things. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and to chat with everyone who's listening. But how can folks get in touch with you?
So they can find me on psychologytoday.com. I have a profile there, and also and they can actually get in touch with me through that website. But also on that, in my profile is included my web address, where they can then go and find a little bit more information, and also get in touch with me through that um, website. And the
Fantastic.
website, if they just want to go to the website, it's Melinda Joy Pattison, LMHC.
Well, fantastic, MJ. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this chat. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too. Have a great rest of your day. It's always so much fun to talk to you
Likewise.
on